The change in the culture of protests is also visible elsewhere around the world, and in this next report we take a look at a report where many, like their Korean counterparts, have chosen peace over violence to express their opposition to certain matters.
A demonstration can be defined as a group of people publicly expressing objection through a rally or a march. In the past, violent clashes between protesters and the police often erupted. But with the turn of the century, candlelight protests have become a peaceful means of demonstration by Koreans. This peaceful rally is not unique to Korea. At protests across the globe, it's not difficult to find candles representing non-violent resistance. Other various tools are also used for peaceful demonstration. In 2013 and 2014, thousands of anti-government protesters in Bangkok gave red roses to police officers expressing their spirit of non-violence. In 2014, in Ukraine, some participants held mirrors in their hands to force police to look at reflections of themselves holding weapons. In Turkey, Canada and Argentina, banging on pots and pans has been a way to create noise and draw attention to specific problems. Last year in Paris, where the UN Climate Change Conference was held, environmental activists laid out hundreds of shoes to symbolize their frustration towards the ban on public demonstrations. Meanwhile, in April 2015, a unique protest that made physical conflict virtually impossible took place in front of the Spanish Parliament building. While slogans were shouted and placards raised, protesters were not actually on site for the world's first hologram protest. Spanish activists intentionally staged this virtual political rally against a controversial law banning protests outside government buildings.
A really hard attack to the base of the democracy, the freedom of expression, the freedom of demonstrating people, the freedom of getting freely the information.
Peaceful demonstrations are taking place in various countries across the world. By rejecting the use of force and promoting peace instead, participants have managed to shed more light on the fundamental values of democracy.
Now, we just saw in the report there are remarkable transformations in how the public voices its opposition to certain issues elsewhere around the world. Atta, before we delve any further, could you tell us a bit more about Spain's first virtual protest which took place last year?
Yeah, actually it was a very historic time because there was a very big turmoil in the politics of the country, with a lot of corruption, with the economy going really bad, and lots of people went to the street. They made kind of a really big movement. Inside that, the government banned some kind of demonstration. They put some laws against the freedom of expression. So there was a hologram protest, just to ask the government, like to show the government that people is against freedom of expression, and if they keep like that, there should be a holograms and not people going to protest. It was very, very meaningful, very nice. And actually this year in Korea they did it here. They kind of copied the idea, and Amnesty International made in this exact place a hologram protest to complain about the lack of the freedom of expression in some politics of this government.
Right. Despite the recent positive changes in the culture of protest here in Korea, there are still some who voice strong aversion to these protests, claiming that they are a disruption to business and to transportation. What is the view of protests among people in your country, Marcus?
Well, protests are still in Northern Europe, are still connected to, associated to the peace movement, I think, in the 60s and 70s. So they're thought of as something that mostly takes place on the left wing of the political spectrum. And still there are associations to the 60s and 70s, where we saw some large public protests against the Vietnam War. In Scandinavia, where I'm from, we saw protests against nuclear power plants. They're planning to build nuclear power plants. But then the culture changed a little bit in the 80s, where we saw groups of more radical, militant nature on the left wing started doing protests against the housing politics in Europe. So this happened all over Europe in the 80s and 90s. We had squatters who occupied abandoned buildings, and then when the police would come and try to evict them, they would organize protests, and then they would clash with the police. So it still has that negative connotation.
I see. What about in Canada, Frank?
Well, in Canada, the biggest protests I think of in recent memory there would have been against the Iraq War. One of the things that's peculiar to South Korea is that you have so many people able to transport themselves to any type of protest or demonstration activity. Canada is such a huge country, it takes hours just to fly from one city to another. There's not a huge metropolis of 20 million people in the country that would bring out, hundreds of thousands to gather. We're more likely, as I mentioned, to have a protest if our team lost a hockey game.
I would like to say that in Spain we have a protest culture very similar to the Korean one, because we had 40 years of dictatorship, 40 years that we couldn't go to the street to protest. I was not alive at that moment. It finished in 1975. But after that, people realized that they have the right to protest. So we have that kind of culture of going to the streets, protest, and make it even a festivity, to protest against the government or against something that people think that they have to complain for. So in that case, people go to the street the same way as they go here in Korea.
I see. Frank, some have also chosen to engage on the online platforms, including Facebook and Twitter, to express their views. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's great. The other day, one of the protests, I went to a pro-park protest, and there was a bit of a scuffle there, and then somebody with a handphone that was filming me was asking me what side of the protest I was on, and my news assistant was panicking. "Oh, I'm on TV, I don't want to be on TV." But I was like, that's okay, don't worry about it. She can do what she wants to do, and I'm a journalist, and so, I have to understand that I'm going to be out there in the media. Any form of civic participation, absolutely, I support.
And these days the way of protesting has changed, with the new technology. So now you can even protest online if you cannot go, and you can make a really big force, together with some people. If you have the same idea, you can make it online, and you can even make a current of opinion without even going to the street.
These technologies are great. I mean, one-man media here in South Korea, I think that term might even be a Korean term. One-man media, where one person, or we should call it, I guess, one-person media, one person can really, engage subculture and create an audience and get their views out there using new technology in ways that we couldn't have imagined before. And I think it empowers democracy.
I would have to agree with you there, Frank. Going back to the candlelight vigils then, do you suppose that these vigils will ultimately secure their purpose? Will the people's message be sent across strongly? Marcus, what do you think?
I think they're very effective. I think when you see these images on TV of the whole center of Seoul, where we're sitting now, one big crowd of people coming together to do these protests, I think it's a very, very powerful kind of protest. So I think it's very, very efficient.
Frank, what about you?
Absolutely. I think that the people of South Korea, those people that are coming out demonstrating, they're driving officials to execute their duties. They're driving the media to investigate this story more carefully. They're the ones that are responsible for, cleaning up this whole scandal. And, a lot of people say it's the media and they're now starting to do their job, or the prosecution has changed the sort of politicization of their offices, and now they're executing their duties. They're only doing that because hundreds of thousands of people are coming out to this square to make sure that they do their jobs.
Hundreds of thousands of people went to the street, and then millions. It just gives the idea of how big the scandal is, because at first you couldn't really know a lot, because there was some evidences, some things with the prosecution, some suppositions that they were true or not. But then when millions of people came to the streets, you could know how big this is, and how big it is not only for the political case, just for the whole Korean society.
Right. Now today, despite the freezing temperatures, we are gathered here at the venue of these candlelight vigils in Gwanghwamun Square. Before we end the program, are there any final words that you would like to add? We'll start with you, Marcus.
Well, I think that it's been an amazing time to be a correspondent in South Korea, to be able to cover these protests and to able to see this these many groups of people coming together in a common cause. If you are going to say something a little bit more pessimistic, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next, right? Because even though you see a lot of people coming together in support of wanting to get rid of President Park Geun-hye, that doesn't mean that these groups of people agree on what's going to happen next, and that's going to be interesting to follow as well.
I see. What about you, Alta?
Well, I think these demonstrations, these historic events, they showed how big the power of the people is, and I hope that those people that are here now, in the future, they will feel that they contribute to make their country a little bit better.
Yes, absolutely. I have to agree with Ada on that part. The power of the people has really been demonstrated here, not just for South Korea, but I think around the world, and the power of peaceful protest to initiate change and democratization in your country is something that South Korea really can show other countries.
Right. According to French political scientist Tocqueville, the health of a democratic society may be measured by the quality of functions performed by private citizens. And in this respect, I believe people here have well demonstrated, in fact brilliantly shown, Korea's state of democracy. Thank you for watching.